Welcome back to Incremental, the continuous improvement podcast. I'm Devin Bedoni.
And I'm Uriel Eisen.
Today, we're going to focus on standardizing processes in job shop environment and improvement of improvement, which we're calling meta improvement. Uriel's going to give us a quick rundown on the concept of double loop learning, which I'd never heard of, some new thoughts on assembly workflow and how you can get good at things. And I'm going to focus on workholding standardization and everything that can flow and stem from that.
Yeah. Also, speaking of learning, I'm reading a book, Designing the Future, which I highly recommend.
You're just full of the quotes. Love it.
I mean, one a week. It's a low bar, but
it's more than I have.
So this one I thought was quite funny. It said, "Learning is not compulsory. Neither is survival." It's from Deming. When talking about building a learning organization. I thought that was funny. It's like, you don't have to do it. It's just, you also don't have to survive as a business.
Yeah. When you first told me that, I definitely put it in just like a personal context. And I was like, wow, that's gotta unpack that a bit. That's pretty deep and kind of harsh.
It is.
But
although as humans, that's probably correct. That's like our big thing, right?
It is. Yeah. It's just, I think we're not, in this Western world, we're not faced with that on the daily.
Not so much.
Quite so much.
And learning is kind of built in to some degree, whatever you call school.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, it's a solid point in the business world.
Yeah. Really interesting. I've been thinking about it a lot.
I think there's like this juxtaposition too, where there is a little bit of business that's like, just keep your head down and keep going.
Mm-hmm.
And it is likely going to work out in some manner or form.
Yeah.
Simultaneously, you have to be learning. And
yeah, I think it'll work out when the economy's good. And then when there's a downturn, it's like the people who are either able to adapt quickly or who have built truly efficient businesses that are very good at delivering whatever it is they deliver. More likely to survive. Anyway.
Or if you have a governmental system that's willing to bail you out.
Yeah, that's also helpful. Yeah. What we learned is be too big to fail.
Yes. So we had a listener question from a few weeks ago. Is that correct? That we didn't get to?
Oh, yeah. Just about, I mean, it wasn't really maybe a question, more an observation that jumping in the middle, like we've both been sort of reading a lot and doing improvements for the past year and a half, 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of the stuff we're talking about is kind of jumping in the middle. So they thought it would be an interesting to see us improve a process from scratch, kind of, or a thing from scratch. Their recommendation was the podcast. So in that vein, we have been making improvements, and so maybe just going through what they are and why we're doing them.
Yeah. We kind of started with nothing except a microphone. Well, 2 microphones. So I guess early on, the first thing we did was made just like a SOPs template in Google Sheets where we can, record our information that we don't want to come, search through email for and stuff like that. Then we made an organizational worksheet where we had like our follow-up notes, our intro notes, listener questions, and all that. It was organized rather badly, just because it was a first pass. I think that's kind of how things work, right?
Yeah, and I would say we were also both very much interested to start recording, to make the barrier to entry very low.
Yeah.
To just start doing it and see if there was much interest from other folks and what the feedback was before really polishing it in any major way.
Yeah. So this last week, we made a new episode template where we have a sheet per week where it's just more readable, I think is the
more readable. I think I was also noticing with the other one, especially it became more obvious as we did more episodes, but we basically started at the top and then you'd sort of have to spend a little bit scrolling down to find where you should enter your notes. And so that was all waste. And especially like I find it much easier to sort of capture my ideas throughout the week instead of just like waiting till the end and thinking what I thought about that week.
Mm-hmm.
And so on your phone, especially, it was really hard to find exactly where you should click into.
Yeah.
And so that was all waste and just like made it harder to do. So I think this solves a lot of that.
And last but not least, we got some headphones so we can hear what we sound like while we're recording instead of just going for it.
Yeah.
And hoping it's good at the end.
And that is sort of because we had an episode that had pretty poor audio. And so from that, we realized that we needed better, essentially, quality control, or quality assurance is even better than quality control.
Yeah.
And so now standard is we sort of record a little bit before we start recording our podcast, to make sure our levels are set correctly and so on. And then, but that was sort of a smaller batch in that we didn't record a full episode before checking it.
Right.
But it was still a batch. And so now with the headphones, we can sort of just monitor it live. So thinking about like shortening that quality control loop and shortening the time between doing work and getting feedback on the work.
Yeah.
To make sure we stay in spec.
That makes something that every recording person does sound very complicated and amazing, but it's just standard.
Super simple.
Yeah. Hopefully that's helpful for whoever that asked. It's kind of, I don't know. I think it's like we've said before, it's something that everybody tends to do once you get into a process, hopefully, is make improvements.
Yeah.
When things aren't working well.
Right.
Yeah. I had one little just interesting tidbit from last week. My friend Josh, who works at Cutting Tool Control, who's a tooling and coolant dealer, has been listening to the podcast and was excited. And we were on the phone talking about,
that's awesome.
About, I don't know, some tool that I needed. And he was like, oh, I remember this thing. So he was telling me about production leveling. He worked at, his first job was at McDonald's.
Okay.
And he was saying that like when
what do they do?
McDonald's?
Yeah. Oh, McDonald's, the burger joint. I was thinking manufacturing, although I guess they manufacture burgers. I've heard of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was saying that when the lunch rush would hit, the manager would have these like preset templates, I guess it would be a way to think about it.
Okay.
Where he'd be like 10, 4, 7. And it would be like make 10 Big Macs, 4 cheeseburgers, 7
interesting
things. And like you do that until he says stop or changes it to a new one, because they kind of had these like pre-balanced loads that they knew would match a typical lunch rush.
Interesting.
And I think they could fill in as needed. But it was just kind of a cool thing to be like, you can do that in, you know, the grand scale of a year.
Right.
Or like in this restaurant environment, you can do it like on a minute by minute basis.
Right. Huh. It's sort of, yeah, I wonder, that's interesting. I read somewhere about Starbucks their process. I forget when they sort of started applying lean, but they basically had all these issues with like old inventory, like coffee that didn't taste as good and so on. And so they came up with this idea of almost like a playbook for the manager, like as if they're like a quarterback or something, where they'd call different plays, which put people in different positions depending on kind of how many people were in the shop and what needed to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I wonder if the McDonald's thing, is that just because they don't have like Kanban quantities, or is that like predictive?
It's predictive.
Okay, so they sort of know there's going to be a demand that looks somewhat like this.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I think it would be like kind of similar to what we were talking about a week or two ago with Toyota doing like predictive transitioning to a pull system. I think it's predictive. And then once you start to see like too much inventory of one thing build
you'll
up,
slow down.
Then you call the ball and go back to like a straight pull.
Yeah.
Which actually, and your comment a moment ago about, what was it? Different employees.
Oh, like playing different positions?
Yeah, playing different positions. I have been thinking a lot recently about kind of like breaking. So we had talked last week for you about like zone defense concept.
Yeah.
And I think there's an added layer that we have to add to that I've been thinking about, which is the type of tasks that a person is responsible for. And I've kind of noticed that there's tasks that just don't mesh well.
Yeah.
And if you try and have a person handle both of those kinds of tasks, you're sort of asking them to fail.
Right. I mean, one really obvious one, I guess, would be like scooping chips out of the back of the CNC with like packaging final like
Yeah.
product, and then there's like coolant and chips in with our finished goods.
Yeah, that's definitely one way to look at it. I was
There's
looking at it just from a time management standpoint.
yeah, or like mental
Yeah, it's like
switching.
if you're like, okay, manage these 3 machines and they all have a 5-minute cycle time, and then you're like, okay, also do this thing that's going to take an hour.
Right.
It doesn't work well unless someone is like just a master of time management and switching back and forth between tasks.
Yeah.
Even so, you're compromising probably both of those tasks.
Right.
So it's something I've been thinking a lot about in having added labor in the shop is like, okay, so I have somebody who's like overarching theme is kind of like a bunch of small tasks chopped up into little bits. You can't just throw a big task into their pile and expect them to do a good job getting it done. And another way I've been thinking about it is things that are like time critical or time sensitive, and things that can easily be shuffled, whether that's in a week or in a day. And so if you can kind of like load a bunch of your shuffleable tasks on one person with a handful of time sensitive things that they can kind of intersperse.
Right.
And then your person that has the majority of time sensitive things, like in my case, it's machine tending. Like you got to keep the machine going. You can give them some small tasks that are not time sensitive that they can shuffle in as they have a gap here or there. And so I think it's an added layer that you have to put onto the zone defense concept of like, you're responsible for this area, but only these things. Because
right. And I think someone mentioned this, DFM Toolworks maybe was sort of talking about like the zone thing doesn't necessarily need to be like
a physical space.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, especially in the shop our size, I feel like
yeah,
the trek across the shop is not too long. I mean, it's definitely waste, but
yeah. Anyway, it's just it's an added thing I've been chewing on as we think about bringing on another person as well.
Yeah,
potentially, and also just for myself. Like I think I'm not very cognizant of it for myself and how I manage my own tasks, and I'm having to like kind of like let that surface and be like, where am I doing this really bad?
Yeah.
Anyway, that was a little bit stream of consciousness, but you want to jump into some of your things?
Sure. Yeah, I guess some of them are pretty quick. I guess so. The single loop versus double loop. I just thought like I don't think this is a new idea by any means. I just sometimes feel like when you name something, you're like, oh yeah, that's a thing. So single loop learning, and again, this is the same book, Designing the Future, would be like a thermostat. So you are trying to, like in R&D, if you're designing something, whether it's a process or a product or whatever it is, you are aiming at a particular target. And so every iteration or every step of the way, you're kind of comparing like, where am I compared to that target state? And so double loop learning starts to reevaluate the target state as well. So not only are you comparing yourself to a target, but then you're also saying, is this target correct? And I think that applies when you're doing, and it's a mistake to forget to do it, and I think we all do this sometimes, but basically if you design a new process for your shop, and you sort of ahead of time came up with all of these requirements for how it should work and exactly what you think it should be, you often miss the mark.
Yeah.
And so the more times you sort of give yourself the opportunity to run a test that validates that end state you're aiming for, I think you tend to save a lot of time and achieve a better result.
Even if you're mid-process or mid-flow, like if you haven't even gotten to it, reassessing it before you've gotten there even.
Yeah, but I think this gets back to coming up with like doing like fail cheap, fail fast. That idea, I think this is what's key about it, is you should design your prototyping stages to de-risk the concept. And that would sort of be the set point. That would be like your target state. It's like, okay, what about that do we think is going to be better? What is the quickest way we can run a test of that aspect so that all of our engineering efforts and all of our design time are actually aimed at a thing we're very confident in?
Yeah.
And not, I mean, I guess confidence isn't really the goal. The goal is correctness.
Right, yeah.
And so like, just because you're confident about a goal, Yeah, and actually, well, this is in our weekly improvements. We'll get to it later, but in our quality control process on our data entry side, which is a bunch of questions about whatever, do we need the data, et cetera. But I think something we didn't do well in that process, and so it's something I think we need to focus on in terms of teaching to everyone in the shop. But basically, this idea, so a lot of the things were the prototypes were kind of polished to a level that didn't match the stage of the process we were at. Right. So like really refined, but then we went to use it to do actual testing to see, is this better? And I was like, no, this is not better. And the changes we needed to make were not major, luckily. But it was all a waste of materials and time, the level of refinement we sort of got each prototype to.
This is prototyping processes or prototyping products? Or
it's a process, but it has some physical aspects. Like it's a series of, it's a Google form and then some barcodes that you scan. And basically just the way, how those barcodes were laid out, sort of what you had to do at each step wasn't consistent. And so it was sort of a mental, it was just, it wasn't a smooth process. So anyway, so yeah, I thought that was really interesting and sort of made me rethink a little bit our assembly station, which I've talked about a bit, about optimizing for one person's versus two person. And so I've been thinking a lot about sort of different layouts and what they gain and what they sacrifice, sort of trade-off curves of the different approaches. And I think what I've settled on is not trying to design the end state, but to design the set of tests or the set of prototypes that I think we should go through to figure out what the best option is for us. And so I'm actually even thinking about building a second cell, because basically we have a assembly area downstairs right now, and we just built a loft, so we're going to move it upstairs. And so I think I'm going to build the one upstairs while leaving the one downstairs in its current state, and the one upstairs will be more a test of a different approach. And then we'll sort of compare the two and do some in this one, some in that one, and then be able to sort of say like, what's good about this, what's good about that, and can kind of iterate that way, instead of assuming that we can, through enough analysis, come to a good solution and then put a lot of time into building that.
And eventually you would have two upstairs.
No, eventually we'd probably consolidate into one. Or one really good one.
One really good one. That could accommodate two people.
That could accommodate both multiple. One and two people, ideally, without increasing the, substantially increasing the non-value added work that needs to happen. Like the big struggle is that if you put too many activities in one place, that eliminates needing to walk between tasks. But it also means that you can't fit two people there. So anyway.
Unless you have one stand on the other's head.
Yeah, right. Our loft, unfortunately, isn't very high.
Shucks.
The head height is lacking. Otherwise, that would be perfect.
Foiled my plan.
What, do you want to jump into your standardizing tool work?
Yeah, this is a big question.
Yeah. Well, we sort of got to it a bit last week, right? Or 2 weeks ago, whenever that was.
Maybe. I can't remember.
Touched
on it. Yeah. Let's see where to start. It's all about reducing setup times, right? And that there's a whole bunch of things that go into that. My goal, I think, is to get to a point where, let's say 95% of our work can come out of a standardized CAM template. And that sort of implies standardized work holding and standardized work offsets. We have a large variation in part size and complexity and stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm just sort of before I try and do too much, I'm kind of want to start off on the right foot.
Totally.
Also, before I spend a bunch of money, potentially.
And I don't know if this is the case, but for anyone listening who does not run a CNC, generally you're loading parts onto a machine and you have to tell the machine where those parts are on the table is one big one. And also what you're using to hold those parts. because the shape of your fixturing, you don't want to hit the fixturing, basically.
Yeah. And the whatever the vice fixture, et cetera, is, it has to actually physically be large enough or to hold the part, or not so big that it occludes the tool from reaching the part.
Right. And so like it's not a one size fits all, unfortunately.
It's
unless
not.
you limit what type of work you take or make serious sacrifices. And sometimes it's not even possible with like cycle times, essentially, right? Like super long tools or whatever. Right. And it gets kind of messy.
Yeah. It comes back to the like pots in the kitchen.
Yeah. And I think it's not a unique problem, which is like trying to standardize trying to come up with a minimal set of parameters, or not parameters, sort of like methods that accommodate almost all of the things you need to do, instead of treating each thing you need to do as a slight variation from right, where none of them are documented. It's just like, and I feel like that it's a great analogy in the kitchen, right? It's like we cook a lot of different types of food, but no one takes the time to document, okay, for this type of recipe, we're going to use a big cutting board. We're going to have 2 bowls on the counter, but it would probably be useful, especially in a kitchen, in like a commerorcial kitchen. Anyway.
Yeah, for sure.
Sorry.
So anyway, maybe I'll start with kind of where we're at now.
Yeah.
Is, this is going to sound terrible now that I'm starting to explain it. Like, what's wrong?
That's why it's on your mind.
Yeah. So we have 3 CNC. This is mostly aimed at the mill. Mm-hmm. We have 3 CNC mills. All 3 of them have rotaries on them.
Okay.
One of them has a tail support so that it can have a full trunnion. Mm-hmm. 2 of them do not. And so kind of how we handle it right now is one machine generally keeps the full trunnion on it, and we can put a selection of different vices on that. That could be a large 6-inch dual station sideways.
Yeah.
We can put a 5th axis, like a centering vise both ways. We also have shunk centering vices that could go both ways. We also have orange Delta 4 vices that can go both ways. And then the second machine has a rotary that we tend to keep what we call like our knuckle trunnion, like the angle plate single-sided trunnion on it. And we'll do 4th axis work and then hand it off to 6-inch dual station vices that are on the table. We'll also use those vices to hold our tray for our gripper programs. And then at present, the R450, the pallet changing machine, has a rotary on one side that we're not even using yet. Okay. And then both pallets have a 5th axis rock lock base on a riser in the middle of the table. So the kind of the end state I have in mind right now, which is funny because we're just talking about that. The end state I have in mind is where I can say in a setup sheet, like use setup 1, 2, or 3, basically. And that will have all of the variables baked in, and that the operator hopefully never has to do any probing.
Right.
That we have enough information in the setup, and it's based on 0-point fixtures or rotary center lines, that they can just put in the work holding more or less and go.
Okay. Yeah.
But I'm not quite sure how to approach that, given that most of the centering vices, max out around, well, the ones that we have anyway. Now that I'm saying that, I should probably reconsider. Max out around 6 inches of grip width.
Okay.
And we definitely do sometimes have parts up to 10 inches, 12 inches wide. So kind of the thought I have in mind would be going away from the dual station vices, putting 0-point plates on risers on all of the tables, and going exclusively to using centering vices, and having the center point of every 0-point station be a standard offset,
right?
And work from the bottom, and then do everything in those in those vices.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, that's a puzzle.
It is. I guess we maybe just needs to throw a bunch of money at it and it'll stop being a puzzle.
Why?
Well, if I just buy a bunch of the same vices and the 0-point
But
fixtures.
which one would you buy?
Shunk, of course.
Yeah.
All roads lead to Shunk. Oh, I forgot one of the options, which is the other option that we have is the automatic KSP
right.
vice, Shunk KSP pneumatic vices, which we also use, which could be a standard.
Well, which, given your later comment about all roads lead to automation, I feel like that might be useful to integrate into more jobs.
It is. They're just eye-wateringly expensive.
They're very expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my thinking around that is that it would be very easy to substitute in CAM to have multiple vices in the same template and just substitute different work offsets that match their Z. As long as everything's working around center line or center point, match different. You actually don't even need the vice in the CAM template. You just need the offset that matches the dimension.
Right.
So I could have, basically that's like we use setup 1 is automatic vices. Setup 2 is manual vices.
Yeah.
Setup 3 is big manual vices or something.
Yeah. I mean, so what are the problems? I guess I think there's a trade-off between standardization and flexibility, right?
Clearly.
And so I think, but you don't actually have that many options. I mean, once you apply how many positions they can be in, you probably have, I'm guessing it's like under 30, which is not zero. But I guess what are the problems with non-standardized? The problems you're actually trying to solve are there's a communication problem of from the programmer to the setup person.
That would be the primary one. Yeah.
Okay, so that's one.
Also there's just the time of the actual setup. Regard the communication.
But those
aside,
are two separate.
Yeah.
Well, not necessarily separate, because if you're super trained at doing one type of setup, it's fast. But
it can be fast, but it's still probably not as fast as a 0 point with no offsetting.
But I guess my point is, I don't know if having you could put 0 points on everything and still not constrain yourself to 3 setup types, right? You could still have 35. You could even approach it as a setup tree almost. It's what vice do you have? Where is that vice mounted? And what orientation is it? Right. And so the other big problem is a programming issue where it's way more efficient to program out of a template.
Yeah.
But you could have a template for each of those.
It's true. Yeah.
Because it doesn't sound like you have that many options. I almost wonder if you could write out all the options, sort of identify where they were useful and why you use them. And then if there was overlap, skip it. Or if there was low hanging fruit, my guess is you don't need the Shunk centering vices, the fifth axis centering vices, and the orange delta vices.
No.
I'm thinking 1 or 2 of those could be eliminated without any sacrifice except for sunk cost.
Yeah, just money.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, do you ever have them all in use at one time?
Well, we just got the Shunk ones.
Okay.
But
gotcha.
We only have one of the fifth axis ones, and that has been a problem of being it's on that machine. We have this other repeat job that needs it. So we need to buy more of something regardless.
Interesting.
So it's sort of
what are we getting?
What are we getting? Yeah.
Which leads to the question, what are we trying to do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The main thing is whether we keep big 6-inch vices on the table, I think.
And could you put those on a 0 point?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I guess also money.
Yeah. Well, not a huge amount. It's not a big deal in the grand scheme. It's more just how variable their setup is once above the 0 point. You could model that, but there's a lot of potential error built into how the operator sets it up.
Why is that?
It could be single station. It can be dual station. You can put the end stops different. You could place the actual jaw carriers different places.
Gotcha.
Whereas I think going to a centering vice takes all of that ambiguity out of the picture.
I see. Right. That makes sense. I I mean, the other thing I would say in terms of getting away from doing any probing is like you can program in the probing.
Yeah, no, exactly.
As long as, I mean, you could even do it with the Vice, right? With the dual station
Mm-hmm.
driven off of, well, I guess the second you remove that middle fixed jaw, that becomes annoying. And then you need like 5 templates to account for all the ways you can set up one of those dual station vices.
There's a lot of variability there that I'm just anxious about. Yeah.
And then lastly, I would just say like it might make sense to think about a system, maybe not lastly,
maybe firstly,
to think about your system as building in a method for exceptions, because like it sounds like none of it's standardized now entirely. I mean, sort of go-tos, but they're not like documented and like, here's what they are.
Yeah.
And there's a CAM template for them. I don't know. So like maybe doing that for your low hanging fruit, like, oh yeah, we always like to hit this. We always like to do it this way when possible.
Yeah.
And so we have maybe 4 or 5 setups that are super documented. And then the rest are sort of like working, is something that you're still working on because you are a job shop. So I do think that if like you try to make it super duper rigid, I think it might be frustrating, especially if you do that sort of prematurely. Like I could imagine in like a year when you turn down a job because it's super non-standard and that's super obvious because you've taken all this time to standardize.
Yeah.
I can imagine that.
Yeah. I think what I'm trying to do is to set a new foundation that we can build standards off of and not necessarily limit myself to 3 options. As I'm saying this, it just is becoming very clear that I just need 0 points on the table and we can put whatever we want on that, be that dual station vices or other things.
Right.
So that's probably where I start. And then we can easily add other options to that.
Right. It's like, yes, I think this is the problem 0 point solves, which is, exactly where it went on the machine.
Yeah. And that, I mean, a lot of lack of repeatability from the orange vices then goes away because they're always on the table in the same spot.
Yeah.
So the 6-inch dual station vices.
Right.
So, yeah, I think this is kind of coming out of just like observing our shop. And I think right now we're doing a decent job at overall flow, but very much at the expense of like the in-station efficiency.
Gotcha.
And based on our revenue numbers and kind of what I know a machine should be capable of doing, I think setups are going to be something that we have to tackle over the next year or the next whenever, forever probably. I think asking people to just be like amazing at it is not the solution.
Yeah, and I could imagine. I mean, so you were sort of looking at this when you were shopping for the R450. I remember you were like, should we make was it for that? I forget what it was for. Should we make our own 0 point? Should we?
Oh, I was talking about, should we use 0 points or just bolt the vices on?
Yeah. And then it was sort of like we could build our own 0 point, essentially. Not 0 point. It was like dowels and screws, right?
Yeah.
Or should we get like a rock lock, the 5th axis, or go with shunk? And we sort of ran the numbers on it. And like the DIY screws and dowel pins, the ROI to step up to a rock lock was 6 months, I want to say.
It was surprisingly short.
Very short, just from the added need to like unscrew a bunch of screws. Like short setup times, I feel like your ROIs in station are surprisingly short. And then once you look at the impact on the whole system, it's like
huge,
staggeringly important.
Yeah.
Interesting. So what does that mean? I guess that means that standardizing how setups go in the machines is already a big step, right? Even if you don't standardize down to a certain number of setups.
I think so. Yeah. I think, removing some ambiguity.
And
it's multifaceted. That's also what kind of makes it a little bit of a puzzle to pull apart. But I think it's a big piece is reducing time and confusion for the operator. A big piece is reducing time and confusion for the CAM programmer.
Yeah.
And then a big piece is just reducing like just the complexity of the potential complexity of the setup itself.
Yeah, and I suspect that's the move, because even if you went to like, I'm imagining if you cut like some plywood templates that sort of reference the corner of the machine tables to locate the orange vices, and then you just bolted them down and used, what is it, like G50, I forget what.
With the extended coordinates?
No, like the rotational, like you can probe and then
yeah.
just rotate your whole axis, your work coordinate system. Like you could do just a rough bolt this thing down and then come like probe it, and that's all driven out of CAM, and that will set it all up. But I think you're still going to suffer, because just getting that vise on the table and bolting it down is inefficient. Like it's a lot of bolts. It's a lot of like, you forgot to slide the T-nut in before you put the bolt on the vise on the table.
Yeah.
I don't know, all that. So I bet it would pay off regardless.
Yeah.
Trying to think if there's a scenario where that is a mistake. Like in 3 years, do you go like, man, this 0-point system is not what we want. This, I don't know. It's hard to imagine also 3 years.
Who knows in 3 years? I think the only thing is me at some point being like getting some oddball job and being like, now we have to move all the 0 points to get these things to the right spacing or whatever. But also doing that once a year or a handful of times a year will be massively offset by, we do changeovers nearly every day. Yeah.
And you might get creative with what pallets you build that go on top of those 0 points, right? Yeah. The only reason they'd have to come off the table is maybe if you needed the extra like inch of Z height.
Yeah.
But if you could just bolt a big pallet to the top of them with like a bunch of threaded holes or something.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the other
pretty
part.
Creative
would be simplifying gripper setups so that there's less, like right now it's like you take the jaw carriers off the orange vise, you put the like pallet jaw carriers on the vise, then you put the base pallet on that, then you probe that, then you put the actual tray on top, then you probe the Z.
Interesting.
And it's kind of like a complicated little setup.
Right.
We have it down decently, but it's still like, it takes a little bit. So
yeah,
I'd like to remove, if that were a 10-second screw, unscrew, pull the thing, put the new thing on and go. That's a massive difference.
It's a massive difference. I think it's also a massive difference in like confidence, where you're just like, that is done. Not, did I remember to probe the corner?
Yeah.
Did I get that all right?
Yeah.
Let me watch the gripper and make sure it's lined up like, and it's looking good.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I'll just get ready to spend some more money.
Yeah. I wonder if there's any work you should do ahead of spending that money.
There is, for sure.
Yeah. What would it be?
You mean like thinking work or actual work?
Well,
or
thinking
both?
Work, I guess most. Well, no, both. I
think what you were talking about like writing out kind of our potential variations, making sure that it will handle what we need it to do.
Yeah.
Or if it doesn't, like figuring out how we can make it handle it.
Yeah.
I need to do some explorations on kind of like what range of possible vices we could get that would be centering vices with larger capacity. Because it could be pretty straightforward. I mean, we could just continue to use the orange vices, but if we got some of the shunk centering vices that maybe have like a 10-inch capacity that we don't use on
Speaking of spending money,
that we don't use on the, on the trunnion where we're doing 4th axis work. They're just like strictly a 3-axis large,
that'd be pretty sweet,
large part holding scenario.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Interesting.
Well, I'm sure we'll come back to this.
I highly recommend this book. It's very, very interesting.
Which one?
Designing the Future. It's very cool. That's sort of like current state, like taking the time to document the current state.
Yeah.
Properly, I feel like is something I skip.
Yeah, me too.
So you're like, I have these ideas. I'm just going to move toward them.
Yeah.
But it might be quite clarifying. Like, I remember when we did like financial forecasting, it was like something I put off for way too long. And then you finally do it and you're like, that's strangely illuminating. Like I knew all those numbers, obviously, because I just typed them into a spreadsheet. But like seeing them in one place, being able to sort of play with them in one place. I'm really due for for another one.
Same.
I've been thinking about that.
Yeah. I had one small thing I wanted to touch on, which was playing off your concept last week of how like even people in like large organizations who do make large sweeping changes do so via very small tasks, like writing an email. I've been continuously kind of thinking through this daily task management, like what to do next thing. And I just had this thought about the fact that we only ever do small things.
Mm-hmm.
Even the big things that we do are a bunch of small things that have a clearly delineated pathway.
Right.
Like cooking dinner, right? It's not
pick up a knife.
Yeah, exactly.
Bring the knife down.
It's a bunch of very small tasks that we don't have to think too much about switching because the pathway is clear. So coming back to this like task switching issue that, and sort of applying SMED concepts to it, and like, 0 single minute exchange of task SMET.
Interesting. Right.
That if we tend to like to group tasks so that things are, so that switching time feels simple. And so just as an exploration, I was kind of like,
that's a very cool idea.
If we could make a pathway that we get to follow easily, it doesn't matter what those small tasks are, so long as the jump to the next one is easy. So you could be doing one thing related to one project one moment,
right?
A completely different thing related to another project another moment. The thing that's hard is that changeover if you have to think about what it is.
I think there's that. I'm thinking through just hearing you say that. I'm also thinking that would really drive the need for sort of very visual tasks, because I think another part of it is what information you need to sort of queue up in your head, right? Like if you're in quoting mind space, you're like aware, you've already taken the time to load all this information into your head that you can use. Like, what is the load on the shop? How many jobs do we have coming up? How many, like, what am I going to be busy programming? Like all this stuff that you've sort of taken the time to get into your head.
Yeah.
If that was super easy and systemized, where that was like this is probably not practical, but like a Google Calendar that you just go like, oh yeah, we have a slot next week for 5 hours and this is less than 5 hours. So bam, like done. Suddenly jumping between those tasks. Yeah. I think it's not only documenting the pathway, I think it would also take a lot of totally worthwhile improvement to those tasks, because it would be super cool if you could just
skip around
without it feeling insane and also inefficient.
Yeah. And it's like, obviously, like it's not like a simple actionable thing, but it's kind of a cool thing to keep in mind in how we organize our days and how we organize our workflows. To be like, it's not fun. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I don't know that fundamentally switching tasks is an issue. Because we do it constantly. We just do it in groups that we're familiar with. And
I think this is a great point and sort of gets to the heart of like why this is interesting and fun to think about, is because, one way of going is to say, well, switching tasks is hard. So how do I arrange my day so that I don't have to switch tasks frequently? Which I think there's some merit to that. But there, as you're pointing out, there's probably a huge opportunity to instead analyze the different tasks you want to do and say, okay, why is it hard to switch between them?
Yeah.
And can I alleviate that? And that really gets to like SMED, single minute exchange of dies. There's a book by Shigeo Shingo who came up with the concept, and all of the attributes of what, or all of the reasons that that's super impactful to an organization, I feel like are super applicable to what you're.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, oh, we like to run big batch sizes on our 100-ton presses, or I guess 1,000-ton presses,
whatever, big,
very large presses. Instead of, okay, let's do that, it's like, why do we like to do that? Oh, it's because our setup times are long.
Yeah. So anyway, it's just kind of a thing I've been mulling over.
That is very interesting. I'll definitely have to think about that. And as I go about my days.
Yeah.
Huh.
I liked your point that you stuck in here. Operational excellence is not a goal. Delivering excellent products to your customers is the goal, and don't lose sight of that. I think that's
Yeah.
very critical, especially for this podcast and the two of us.
Yeah. So that was again from Designing the Future. They were just talking about that, and I was like, that is worth tucking in here.
Yeah.
Yeah. None of this is really the point of doing business. I mean, it's a lot of fun, which is, I think, but it's
Yeah.
also very beneficial to the business. But yeah, not losing sight of like what is the actual goal here.
Yeah. You
And I don't
can't.
even know if delivering excellent product to your customer is the goal. I guess what's his name? Goldrat. Eliyahu Goldrat would say that making money is the goal. In fact, he has a book called The Goal, and it's profit.
Interesting.
And a pathway to profit is making your customers very happy.
Yeah. I have mixed feelings about that personally, but that's just like a personal values deal. I guess it's profit. I don't know. The goal of my business is to provide a reasonable, a good living for myself and my customers, or myself and my employees.
Yeah.
And as well as deliver a good product to my customers. And profitability is important to make that happen.
It sure is. But
for me, it's not necessarily at the expense of.
Right. Maybe saying profit is the goal implies that it's at all costs. Like go after profit, and no matter what else is suffering, you're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not really it, but without profit, it would be hard to do any of those other goals.
Yeah. I think that's more of a value discussion. Profit is clearly important for a successful business. We can't argue with that.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
And so I guess like that is the goal. Doing all this process refinement is not really the goal. And I think where that comes into play is if you do lose sight of that, you can definitely spend too much time on improvements and not actually time selling anything. Mm-hmm. And I think some people suffer from that in the startup world, where they have such a brilliant idea that it'll definitely sell itself, and they spend a huge amount of time and money getting to manufacturing without any serious tests of like, will you give me money for the thing I built?
Yeah.
Have I told the wallet story on this podcast?
I don't recall.
Okay, so I made a wallet. It's actually in my pocket. Made it years ago. But I showed it to my friend. I made it. It worked. I showed it to my friend. He's like, man, that is an awesome wallet. You should sell those. I was like, all right, I'll sell you this one right now for $5. He's like, well, I actually have a wallet. And I feel like that is like, I've told that story like whenever I talk to like whatever startup people on prototyping, that is the story, because I could have spent so much time, and there's so many people out there who do spend a lot of time, a lot of money building out a website, getting a designer to like make my t-shirts and make stickers and packaging and all this stuff, because I had a really nice wallet. And that test of like just make a wallet and try to sell it is actually what you're going to have to do, no matter how nice your packaging is.
Right.
And I think there is something to be said for, like, maybe it's not the wallet that's selling it, but I think coming to terms with that and realizing that ahead of time, and realizing like, oh, we are like, there's so many companies out there, right, who do a great job at like selling shoes, and you look at the shoes and it's like, that is virtually the same. They're just really good at telling a story about it. They're really good at like building out email lists that are, high quality leads. They're good at something here.
There's an argument to be said that that's actually their product.
Exactly. And I think if they fooled them, like the sooner you realize that, the better off you are. Mm-hmm. And so like just being aware of like, what is the goal here? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's important.
It's important. Yeah. So it's another question to be considered. As we've been kind of reducing the noise in the workflow in the business, which is fantastic. And also, I just follow up on last week after our massive, felt to me to be massive failure. We were able to get back on track, and things are kind of humming again. And it was kind of cool to see that actually we could bounce back from it pretty quickly and be kind of right back in the groove. So anyway, that was cool.
That is cool.
as I've handed off some of my administrative tasks and just kind of what I'm calling noise, things that needed to happen but weren't happening efficiently, etc. It's becoming very obvious how much of a job programming really is in our shop. Potentially a bottleneck, sometimes a bottleneck. And now that we have a fourth mill, it's going to be even more so.
Right.
So it's kind of like a question of pathways is, do we put more labor on programming? Do we make it more efficient through templating? Do we target sales towards projects that have longer run times so that the programming load is more appropriate for our labor pool? I could add to that also, do we target projects that are simpler to program, or a combination of all of these things? And there's probably some other things we could throw in there as well.
Yeah.
But it's sort of like, how do we tackle this?
I might throw cross training in there too, right?
Between people?
Like if you had more people who could program or could do some of the programming, even if then you took it like a fine tooth comb to it at the end or something. Sure. I know that's a big lift.
I guess that also falls under more labor.
Well, it would be flexible labor, because the second you add more labor, it's like, are you paying them hourly, or now are you like paying them all the time?
And I don't mean more overall labor, but it's more labor doing programming.
Totally. Yeah. Yep.
So what's your hunch?
Interesting. I mean, I think those are like identifying those levers is definitely interesting. Mm-hmm. I think I was just talking about this with a buddy of mine. He's something similar. He is trying to figure out how much money to spend on marketing. Mm-hmm. And he has a pretty substantial budget laid out. And I was kind of wondering, like, what would happen if you took that budget and applied it to delighting your current customers so that you got many more references out of them for him. Mm-hmm. And I've sort of thought about that for what we're doing, is like, if you are spending money doing something, like what are all the ways you could spend that money, and are any of them more effective? And the way it applies here, I think, is like realizing that there is substantial value in having a long runtime job might change your approach in like quoting, might change your approach in, I don't know what else, but like what is the value to your shop of a huge project? Mm-hmm. And obviously overstating that, like, you don't want to give such a low quote that it's like you're essentially running a mill for free. It's like, that doesn't help. You'd rather have it idle. Yeah. But I don't know. Just
it's an interesting thing. I think it's like a tag onto this is that I've been noticing that the shop runs the smoothest when we have a mix of new and repeat jobs.
Interesting.
Which again points towards setups and programming being a bottleneck, because those are both mitigated when we have repeat work.
Right.
So you could say, let's get more repeat work, or you could say, let's tackle the bottlenecks, or both. I think it's probably both.
Probably both.
The question of how, of the kind of the sales part, I'm curious about, and I don't have a good pathway for that yet. This does lead into my other question.
Well, I guess just one last piece there. I think adding labor to a process is almost like adding inventory.
Yeah.
It's like, it might just hide your problems. Yeah. And so not to say that's not the move, because if you could be much more profitable in the next 6 months by doing that.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's great. Inventory. You could also think about it as like adding a workstation.
Yeah. It's
like if you were putting it in a manufacturing term, it's like, okay, if we were making 1,000 units a month, we could make 2,000 units a month if we added a second of this one machine, because that's the bottleneck. Then clearly add a second one.
Yes, except that there may be some much cheaper changes that would let you put out 2,000 a month.
Sure.
Like I remember in I forget if it was in a book or an essay that Goldratt wrote. And this is a real example. There was a factory that had a bottleneck on their machine, and they were about to lose a massive contract because they kept missing their numbers.
Yeah.
And what they realized is, in a shift change, shift one would pack up their stuff and like go to shower and leave. And shift two would get off their bus, come in, change their clothes, and get on the production line. And there was like a full hour of downtime, I want to say, or maybe an hour and a half.
Yeah.
And so he was like, well, why is this down for an hour? Like, your bottleneck is down for an hour. Why is that? And it was like, oh, well, shift 1 needs to get ready to get on the bus that shift 2 gets off of. Otherwise, we'd have to run 2 buses. And he's like, well, just keep the people on that bottleneck, keep them here through the shift, and then send them home in a cab. They're like, oh, well, they live in 3 different places. Okay, well, send them home in 3 cabs. Like, it does not matter, right? Like,
yeah, or hold the bus.
Yeah, you can spend a ton of money there to solve that problem in a different way besides adding a second. Like, they couldn't add a second machine because it was so expensive. And I think like, again, like looking at the limits of a problem space, like if labor was crazy expensive, you would definitely go after all these little efficiencies.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess that suggests that those efficiencies should definitely be tackled, but I don't know that it's worth tackling them ahead of just, like, if you found the perfect person who wanted to program on an hourly basis and they were super familiar with machining and even had run like your type of mills and on 4th axis stuff, you'd be like, slam dunk, let's do this, right?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I honestly put the labor in there as like it's an option that I don't want to pursue, but that's probably being silly.
Maybe. I mean, I think it would be a hard problem to solve. I think it would be an easier problem to solve as you fix a lot of the reasons you're currently inefficient, like templating,
all the things.
0. Yeah,
our entire process.
yeah. And I've found that on the mill, in our shop, is just like, as our documentation has gotten better, the ease of handing it off is unbelievably easy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of outrageous because it felt like such a complicated process, and now it's really not.
Yeah.
Like, you used to have to figure out like what stock size to use, and that was like this thing I knew in my head of the different dimensions of the stock and which one worked where. And now it's like, it's a color, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, you just pull. Yeah. This is kind of a non sequitur, but unless you had something.
No, go for it.
So, Dan Gelbart, for those of you who are unfamiliar, is probably has the best prototyping content on YouTube. There's an 18-part series. Maybe it's not. I mean, it's worth a watch. It's an 18-part series. And he goes over prototyping. He is sort of in like ultra precision machining. That's sort of his background. Sold a company for an eye-watering amount of money in the early 2000s, I think it was. Anyway, I had the honor of visiting his shop and sort of talking to him about stuff. And he had a very interesting take, which I've sort of been thinking about recently, about sort of like passion, and that you have to pursue your passion because it is the only, you have to pursue your passion because it is the only way to spend enough time on something to get unusually good at it. Like, if you, and that's assuming that you want to become unusually good at something, but I was sort of thinking about it in the context of like, I guess like process development and, like just thinking about all this lean stuff all the time. It's like, the more you think about it and the more you try to apply it, even if they're the wrong tools for a particular process, the more you try to like bang your head against the wall, like the more practice you're getting at doing that. And I've sort of been thinking about it in the context of like, as we add people to our team, trying to get them excited about what we're doing to a point where they do think about it. Not just when asked. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and like
that's a challenge.
Yeah, and sort of teaching or getting people sort of not only on board and excited about what they're doing, but also like giving them the tools to do it well, to succeed, which I feel like then makes you think more. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I just thought that was interesting because, and then his last piece was like, so that means that if you're into something like engineering or he's like, that's great. If you're passionate about poetry, he's like, I'm sorry, but it's going to be hard to make money. But he's still like, you got to do that. Like, I don't know. Yeah, it's hard to force yourself to do something you're not actually excited about in a way that is where you'll be like super desirable, I guess.
Yeah, unless you find other motivating aspects. Like, a lot of people use money.
Yeah.
Like, I am so passionate about making money that I am going to give this everything
Totally.
to make a lot of money.
Totally.
Not about
But I would say
poetry.
that's you're following your passion.
True. I
About
suppose so,
money.
yeah. But I guess what I'm saying, it doesn't have to like be necessarily the specific task
No.
or specific whatever you want to call it. Like,
No. And getting back to the idea of like everything we do in the day is made up of very small tasks. I don't know that I'm very passionate about any of those small tasks. Like I'm not that into like typing on my keyboard.
Hate it.
Yeah, not that passionate about emails.
I know. Like, how did I become a computer jockey?
I know, same. Yeah. I don't know if I'm even that passionate about like CAD or CAM. I mean, it's very cool. But I think I'm excited about what it can do, not about the act of doing it.
I'm similar. Yeah, I've been discovering that CAM programming is actually one of my least favorite parts of my job.
Mm-hmm.
I think largely because it's because I haven't done enough templating and stuff, and it just starts to feel tedious.
Like you're doing a lot of non-creative work.
It's a lot of non-creative work.
Yeah.
And then generally when I have to do really creative work, it's very stressful.
Right.
Because it's like a serious problem. And I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to get through this.
Why is this creative all of a sudden?
Yeah.
Yeah, that shouldn't be creative. I should be following a template.
Yeah. I do find that like, I love the overall process, and I love like thinking about the larger workflow.
Yeah.
I used to love just sitting there and turning cranks and watching metal peel.
Same.
Not so much.
I mean, it's pretty amazing.
I mean, I still like to watch the machine cut sometimes, just stand there and eat lunch watching a machine, which is pretty funny now that I say it.
I may or may not have fallen into the trap of trying to shave down my cycle times on one of my parts, just because I was watching it and was just getting like really bummed out by all the waste. I didn't succeed very much. I mean, I made it better, but not by enough to warrant the time, I would say.
Actually, I have a question.
But I'm super interested in like learning more about hand coding some of this stuff.
Yeah, actually, so I have a question for Brother Machine Tool people. If you use it, if you know if a G100 line, this is very esoteric, if a G100 line includes a spindle stop, because the current like Fusion post has an M5 prior to the G100 line.
Oh.
So it pulls the spindle back to the retract plane, stops the spindle, then does the G100. When you watch the demo videos of Brother, it's not like that.
That's the thing. So when you watch the Brother videos, I don't know the answer to that. That is, I bet, something we could just make a phone call about.
We could probably we could even just test it.
Yeah.
I think it would alarm instead of crashing itself.
I bet that's right.
I just haven't taken the time
to have it retract the spindle.
Well, you could do it at slow.
But watching the demo videos, it's so clear that their programming is very different from my programming.
Incredibly different.
I don't know if it's hand programmed. I don't know if it's just a more powerful CAM package. It's probably a mix.
Probably a mix of both.
But I think I could get the problem is this, and it's actually very relevant to continuous improvement. If I move to a hand coded option, it makes the barrier to making changes incredibly high, because I will have invested like, I don't know, easily 10 hours, I feel like, to program to get a really efficient program.
Yeah.
And maybe you just go after like a few moves that are like egregiously slow and inefficient, right? And just hand program those. But now you have this whole issue of like documenting that those sections are hand programmed.
Yeah.
If you ever want to push an update, and we do push updates. So like we redid our CAM to shrink our stock size. That was super worthwhile, because now we're paying less for stock. We are wasting less aluminum. We are shoveling less aluminum out of the back of the machine and having to drive that aluminum to a recycling facility. So like it's just a huge win. And
are you getting more parts? Yeah, you probably are getting more parts per bar now than you were.
Almost definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. But also we went from 5/8 material down to 1/2 inch material.
Oh.
Before
you switched?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so
makes sense. One little thing, we're very busy right now, which is fantastic, but also interesting. As we've gotten busier, and there's like definitely a production bottleneck. 3S and daily improvements have like definitely tapered off a little bit.
Yeah.
And I'm just having a difficult time, and maybe this kind of comes back to like just the job shop. It's like job shop mentality of having to be like, when there's free time, you do a bunch of improving stuff, and when it's all hands on deck, it's all hands on deck. But part of me wants to maintain a little more of a rhythm so that it becomes more habitual. And I'm not quite sure how to handle that right now, because it is like, one option is just being like, last hour of the day, tend machines, but don't do any other tasks, and just, do some improvement stuff and clean and whatnot, because the machines need to keep running, versus being like, okay, stop everything you do and just work on improvements.
So we actually, in that vein, we switched our approach. We were coming in and the first hour was improvements. Now we spend an hour getting everything kind of rolling, and then we jump into improvements, because we can we can just have a lot of things happening while we do those improvements, whereas the other way we just don't. The other thing I would just say is, like, my suspicion, like, I mean, obviously do whatever you want. Free country, most people don't improve at all. So,
it's a free country, be mediocre. Knock yourself out.
Well, that actually reminds me of a funny thing. I think it would be a big missed opportunity to not still take the time to notice and document problems. Like, even if you're not addressing them, just being like, hey, I had this issue today. And I know for us, when things get busy, it's really hard to stop what you're doing, walk over to a whiteboard and write it on the whiteboard. Like, we had this issue. Yeah. But like, if you do that, because it also tests your system at a very different level, that probably exposes new problems. And then when they're done, like 2 weeks later, you're like, what was it? Like, I remember there was something we wanted to change, but I can't remember what. Yeah. So like, I think just maintaining a habit of like at least taking notes on what's not working, or like where you see issues.
I will say too that I think we generally like having like a systemized, like kind of methodical approach to improvements is new for us, but I think generally we've had a culture of improving. So we do still do a lot of little stuff here and there, and refinements. It's not like we're just swapping parts and just shipping.
Right. Right. I feel like that's true for everyone. I mean, maybe not everyone, but most people are improving some stuff.
Yeah. I mean, definitely you go into some shops and you're like, you guys do not.
Yeah, that's true. The funny thing you reminded me of is I've been talking to some people in aviation, because I think in aviation, they've done an amazing job of building a culture of referencing SOPs, essentially, without it sort of eliminating the feeling of autonomy and like you're bringing your mental capacity to your job. Yeah. And so I think that's really interesting. But another piece that's really cool, basically, I guess what I'm getting at is I feel like they have a tremendous advantage in that industry because mistakes lead to death. Yeah. And so they actually take seriously like all these problems in operations. And so another piece is like when there is a new failure, actually taking the time of root cause analysis and then documenting a new procedure that will eliminate that problem, and then propagating that new training to everyone in the field is something that they do all the time and every day. Yeah. And most other industries don't have a mechanism for it, are terrible at doing it, don't do it at all. And so I just feel like it is, I mean, obviously a blessing in disguise, but the fact that like any mistake can lead to a whole bunch of people like
falling out of
the sky, I feel like is a huge advantage of doing these things and taking them seriously. Yeah. And I don't know, I've been driving around, you see all these Kubotas everywhere.
I have one myself.
They're very good tractors. Yeah. It's sort of insane to me that we are buying, like, the common knowledge is just like, oh yeah, Japanese stuff is really good. Yeah. And it's inexpensive to repair. So like, buy that, right? Yeah. But that feels like such a cop-out that we aren't, like, that our industry hasn't been able to match that.
To it, yeah.
And I feel like this is why, because like reading these books, they are insane about chasing down little problems and actually taking the time to root them out and solve them. Yeah.
Did I tell you about my crazy Kubota repair story?
No.
I still don't know how I fixed it, which is extremely unnerving.
But it is still fixed.
It is still fixed, and I did not have to what they call split the tractor, which is where you take the back half off the front half. Yeah. It was one of those situations where you're like, last ditch effort, like Hail Mary, I'm just going to throw a wrench on this thing and move it by hand and see if it works. And it fixed it.
Whoa.
Yeah. It was for anybody who knows anything about hydrostatic drives, it stopped going in reverse.
Okay.
And I tried all these things. I checked all the like pressure relief valves, did a bunch of like swapping back and forth, changed the oil, changed the filters, did all the things everybody says. And it was like, I had come in the shop manual to the point where it was like, if it's not this, split the tractor. I was like,
no.
Oh my God. It's always been kind of slow in reverse. I think it's like it's limited so that you can't back up too fast.
Sure.
So I took the like linkage off and just like over traveled the actuator shaft in reverse and nearly ran over myself because I wasn't expecting it to move.
Nice. Well, I'm glad you didn't.
But yeah, I just put it back together and it works.
Wow.
It's really weird. It's very strange.
That's awesome.
It's pretty unnerving.
Yeah.
That's what fixed it. There might have literally just been like some gunk in there.
Right.
Block. Anyway.
Interesting.
Kubotas. Cheap to fix.
But why aren't, I don't know. I just feel like I was looking up differences in labor costs between Japan and the US, and they don't account for the difference in price.
Oh, no. And Germany as well.
Yeah.
Right? Like two of the huge manufacturing powerhouses of the world, Japan and Germany, tend to have on par or higher labor costs than here, right?
Japan was a little bit lower on face value, but I didn't do enough digging. They were sort of saying that there's other factors that make it much more equivalent. So basically it's not really a factor. Yeah. Germany, I think, has higher costs.
Yeah.
But Japan exceeds the value of Germany, I think, pretty consistently. Like German has excellent quality.
Oh, in like GDP of exports?
No, just in like if you buy a product per dollar.
Cost. Yes.
I think Japan does a exceptional job.
For sure. No, I'm just saying that like they both are known for high quality and people are willing to pay. But yeah, the Japanese one where it's like they're also the same or cheaper than what we make here and better is
right. And that's including shipping it across the ocean, which I know is typically a low proportion of what you're paying. But it's just wild to me. And I don't think I just think it's like,
well, not always shipping. A lot of Toyotas are made here.
That's true. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, should we do a little wrap up with our weekly improvements?
Yeah. Let's jump into some of those.
So I finally got around to ordering indicator lights for my machines.
Oh, very cool.
I haven't installed them yet, but they should be here this week.
Okay.
I'm pretty excited.
I'm curious to hear about that because we need one.
Yeah. So the brother like off the, from them is pretty silly expensive, like over $700 for a little light and a plug. It's a plug-in, but anyway.
Okay. Yeah.
Got some info from some Instagram friends about how to set it up. It should be relatively straightforward, I think.
Very cool.
The Takasawa one for the lathe was $180 for a plug-in.
Okay.
There was not clear documentation on how to do a DIY version, so I was like, I'm just going to buy that one and plug it in. I think that's going to be pretty massive because, as I said, like we're definitely going for overall shop flow at the expense of in-station efficiency right now, and generally speaking, handling many things at once. And I think it's going to be very helpful for everybody, especially now that, like, I don't know, it's just funny, like experiencing the difference in your shop. But like 2 years ago, the shop was quiet a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And now that there's like 4 machines cranking most of the time, or at least a lot of the time, a significant portion of the time, the sound like does not help you to know when one of the machines has stopped.
It's funny you say that because when my machine stops, I instantly know because it's the only one in the shop.
Yeah, no, it's like, even myself, who I'm extremely attuned to it from years and years, I still miss it. So I think that's going to be pretty cool. Also, as I was searching for them, a lot of them are referred to as andon lights.
Oh, cool.
And you can get them with like a preset little like switch.
As in a manual
switch. I'm not sure
That's
how
intriguing.
or if that would come in use, but I was kind of like, this could maybe be a thing at some point, similar maybe to our
that could totally be useful because
cycle start covers, where it's just like a way to communicate status.
For us, the tumbler, and maybe for you, the tumbler would be a good one. So we have a piece of paper that's different colors on both sides, and so you manually flip it, and it's just magnetic, so you can see it from across the shop and know if you should go fill it, or what its state is, so you don't have to walk across the shop to find out. But that could I'm thinking maybe we should switch to lights, because I want to switch to lights and then switch to a PLC running the thing such that it will actually tell you it's whether you should unload it or load it or
that's whatever. A great idea. And do you have multiples or just one?
Just one right now. As we've discussed, it's something I really need to
we have 3, but it'd be really cool if you could just like turn them on. We have 3, and each one has a pump, a coolant, or not coolant, but like whatever the water stuff is. The soap mixture pump. And so if we could turn each one on just with like actually probably PLC might just be a switch and a time delay kind of thing. And
I just bought on Amazon, you can just buy a timer, like a countdown timer. So for us, it's all hooked up to that. But from across the shop, you don't know if you should go do something.
Right. It'd probably be fairly easy to wire in that timer with some kind of a relay that was like, when your tumbler went on, it turned it to green, and
that's something I want to get a little bit more comfortable with, are the like some of those like off the shelf kind of like building blocks, like
totally
DIN rail,
just get a bunch
bits
of it
that you can like just wire together really easily, and have a machine that has some logic.
So we've kind of ran into some job board issues. As I mentioned, we're busy.
Cool.
And we have more work than will fit on our job board.
Okay.
Sort of.
Interesting.
Part of the issue being that there's a bunch of parts on the job board that are there just because maybe they haven't been shipped and invoiced yet, because one of the parts in a order is not complete for one reason or another.
Okay.
But they're still taking up space on the board.
I thought each vertical was only one part.
It is.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah. So, but they're still taking up that whole vertical slot. So a small thing we started doing was, if they're just waiting to ship an invoice, we take the like tag that has the number on it and we just move it to the ship and invoice line.
Okay.
And then you can fill in the whole board underneath it with a new part.
Gotcha.
So that it's not just taking up space unnecessarily. In a perfect world, we will maybe move to a second board that handles anodizing and laser marking as well, because that tends to be a big time delay as things, we have to ship them away, then someone else post-processes them, ships them back. We're not quite how to handle that yet, because our job board is in effect a checklist that we populate when we put it in with a job on the board. So then we would have to populate 2. But anyway, there's some things to figure out there that we're not sure how we're going to tackle yet. But just moving that thing up helped quite a bit. We added a restaurant slip holder.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I saw that on Instagram.
So that was really cool. So we are having this issue where we would print out multiple stickers, what we're calling travelers, for each job. One would go onto the tag, the magnetic tag on the board. And initially, the other 3 that were for raw stock, cut stock, and finished parts would just go into a bin next to the board. But depending on the job, we wouldn't necessarily use all of them. So then there'd be a bunch of extras left in there that were just kind of like mucking up the business. And even just finding them was just kind of a pain. So then we started just magneting the extras below the vertical row that was the job. But the magnets would tend to want to jump to the one next to it. The things would fall off. They would get all, anyway, it was kind of a silly thing. So we bought a long restaurant order slip holder, and I think it's going to be pretty good.
Very
so
cool.
Right now,
you just slide them up, and it holds them.
Yep, you just slide up. There's it's like just like a tapered slot.
It's like some barrels in there or something.
They're just marbles.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and so you push it up, and it pushes the marble out of the way, and then the marble weight just kind of like cams itself back into.
Very cool.
Yeah, and then one last thing that was kind of in the vein of the switching tasks is I made little star cutout magnets.
Okay.
And at the beginning of the day, if there's like critical tasks, I will put a star on it so that when I get pulled away from something that I'm doing, it's easy for me to come back, look at the board and be like, oh, those two things are starred. That's where you start.
Very
Like an entry point back into my workflow, because I still do get distracted by many little tasks every single day. So
that's a great idea.
Yeah, I was thinking about maybe making different colors for each person.
Oh, and they could just go stick them on the things that they know they need to focus on.
We haven't discussed it as a group yet, whether that will be helpful or just like
more
another
noise
thing to manage and more noise. But anyway.
Interesting. That's cool.
So that was kind of our week.
Very nice. We did a bunch of improvements and I didn't document them, so now I'm having trouble remembering them. The few, so we did, we finally started building a prototype of a new webbing rack, and that is trying to make changing colors on our, basically being able to offer more colors or just be able to switch colors. The webbing, basically cutting the webbing with all the options we offer is a little tricky.
Yeah.
So that's one. And I think we've done a pretty long process of just making sure we like the design and that it's scalable and so on, that it checks a lot of the boxes before we start building. So I think it's going to be pretty good. We're building a prototype now and then have plans to expand it if it's effective. And then, we've been working on this barcode QC system, and that's been really helpful. So the problem was entering the data from our QC station was kind of time consuming and annoying. And so now it's basically a Google form that then has a real world equivalent on the wall that is just a bunch of barcodes. And so you just move from left to right, scan a barcode in each vertical, and that completely fills out the form and then submits it.
Yeah.
And that has, so that's gotten really fast. We have a few more changes to make there, but that's been really cool. You can build in like tab and enter into that's a barcode. And so that sort of tabs to the next question, and then like we'll tab to the submit button and hit enter for you. So that's been good. And I think it's going to, like, that was sort of like a pilot to apply that same thing to other aspects of the shop. Cause I just think like having a scanner places that you didn't like. So right now you just scan a QR code to pull up the form, and then you move across and scan it and it submits a thing. So like, even if you had like coolant on your hands or paint or, whatever, if your hands are messy, you don't have to be like logging into a computer. So I just think like gathering data elsewhere in the shop is going to be a really useful tool. So
cool.
Yeah.
Right on. Well, I think that's us for the week. Thank you everybody for listening, etc.
Absolutely. Please continue to tag us in improvements. We are incremental CI on Instagram. Or reach out and let us know what you're enjoying, what you'd like to hear more about, less about, all that. All feedback is good feedback.
Stop talking.
And till next week.
Yeah. See you then.